Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to the 2021 edition of the Translating Europe Forum, or TEF, as old-timers like to call it. This year, it's focusing on the theme of collaboration in times of automation. My name is Aminda LEIGH. I'm a journalist, moderator, and most importantly for this event, a translator, specializing in the film industry and the Holocaust. Those of you who have attended TEF before in the last couple of editions may have seen me, and if you took the time to watch the video tutorial explaining how this Umbrella platform works, which I hope you have done, you will have seen me there too. I'm delighted to have been asked to moderate the proceedings over the next 3 days, which I can tell you are going to be jam-packed with exciting speakers, innovative formats and invaluable information, whatever part of the industry you work in. Now, it won't have escaped your notice that we are holding the forum online again this year. Even though we would have loved to have met up in person, the ongoing pandemic has led us to stay in the virtual world, but we're delighted that TEF 21 could go ahead even in this format. Now, I'm logged in from Rome, where I'm based and where the weather is absolutely awful today, but I'd like to find out where you're logging in from. And to do this, I'm going to open a poll for you to answer. You can find the polls on the right-hand side of your screen near the top. Just click on the tab Queues and Polls, and you should see the question, which is, from where are you watching TEF? Not a difficult one, that one. Just type in your answer and press send, and we'll start to see all the entries forming a word cloud in front of our eyes. So even though it's not such a challenging question, I'm going to leave it open for a little bit, and it gives everybody a chance to contribute. And in fact, I'm going to try and write my contribution as well. So I'll do that in a second. While you're sending in your replies, here it is, I'm sending in mine. I'm going to give you a bit of housekeeping information. Oh gosh, and I can already see lots of countries coming up there. That's great. So a bit of practical information on how the site works, the platform works, and to give you a bit of your bearings in this geographical space. First of all, you may have noticed that there is no interpretation. The reason is that last year we provided interpretation, but almost no one used it. So in the end, this time we chose a platform which is best for networking, which is something you've told us is very important to you in your feedback from the last editions. And in fact, this year's programme features two kinds of networking. There are dedicated times with moderated virtual networking sessions, some of which will also feature panel members. These are going to be held in the breakout rooms, accessible from the main menu on the left-hand side of your screens. There'll be someone there to break the ice and help the conversation get started, because we know that online conversations and networking are not quite as easy as meeting someone over a cup of coffee. This Umbrella platform also offers the possibility to organise one-to-one meetings with other participants. And in fact, more than 400 meeting requests have already been sent. And since TEF is on automation, it seemed natural to pioneer the way and let artificial intelligence weave its magic and do the matchmaking for you this time, identifying connections that fit your profile. Now, obviously, the more details you provide in that profile, the more chance the AI will have to hone in and find that perfect match for you. So if you haven't already created a profile, please do so with as much information as possible to give you lots of opportunities and make the most out of these 3 days. If you look on the right-hand side of the platform screen, you can see your profile picture and name. All you need to do to edit your profile is click on your image and you'll see the option Edit Your Profile, where we encourage you to put in as much information as possible. On the central part of the home page, you can see some of the profiles that the AI has found for you, and you can click on them, chat, and set up meetings with the people. You can also see more profiles via the People tab on the left-hand side of the screen. Please do accept, decline, or reschedule meeting requests. The AI can't do that for you. We need some human input there, just like we do with machine translation too. And while we've had more than 400 requests for meeting, we've only had 100 accepted. So do remember to keep checking the meeting requests and accept, reschedule, or decline. Also, looking at the main screen, the organisers will occasionally post important notifications, which you can see on the right-hand side of the homepage screen when you log in, underneath that little bell. Please do read them to keep up to date with any developments and the latest news from the event. In the sessions themselves, you can chat with other people watching by using the chat function on the right-hand side of the session page. But please don't put your questions in there. They should go in the tab next to the chat, which is called Questions and Polls, and which you're hopefully now all using, I can see, to send in where you're coming from. So that's where you send in your questions as well. We're going to advise you on to have the Brella screen full screen so that you can see everything nice and clearly. And last but not least, for social media fans out there, please do use the hashtag 2021TEF, TEF, to share your thoughts on the event's discussions with the wider world outside. Now, before I introduce the topic of this forum, I'd like to lock the Slido for the voting and let's see the results. Okay, we've had more than 265 people answering. Thank you very much indeed. We've got quite a few. The biggest one is from Brussels. That's not a surprise, really. We've got people from Italy. So thank you for joining. I hope the weather's better where you are. Barcelona, Madrid, Berlin, the UK, Poland, Ukraine, so lots of countries there, Riga, Finland. So we have people from all over, which of course you would kind of expect with a translation forum. And in fact, out of all the people that have registered, we know that over 80 countries are represented. That's quite an amazing feat. So we are now close that Slido poll. Thank you very much indeed. And just to talk a little bit about who you are, because the Translating Europe Forum has always been about bringing professionals together from all strands of the profession. And we have over 2,000 people registered for the event this year, which is very impressive. And they are a mixture of LSPs, academia, freelance translators, which are actually the largest group, around about 1/3 of registered participants. We have international organizations, national administrations, European Masters in Translation students and DGT trainees, other institutions, and of course we have the media as well. So this year we are gathering to consider one of the topics that is not just affecting the translation industry, but will soon be affecting all businesses in some way or another. We're going to be looking at how we can find out how we can work together as automation becomes more and more common. Over the next 3 days, we're going to be asking and hopefully starting to answer questions such as, will automation increase the level of cooperation with machines alone, or will human language professionals find new ways to interact, either on or offline? What about how does the human translator fit into this new way of working? Can we expect to work less while being more productive? Or will we work even longer hours, post-editing the enormous volumes of raw translation produced by the machines? Are we already living in an era of post-editing industry? And will that last, or will it be replaced by something else? And if so, what? These are just some of the topics we'll be covering in the sessions coming up. Feel free to pick and choose the ones you're most interested in. You can add them to your schedule. However, we've also built in plenty of breaks in the programme, so you can follow the whole conference if you wish, without being completely glued to your screen the whole day. So, without any further delay, I'd like to now move on to our first session, which is going to set the scene for this year's forum. And I'd like to introduce the topic, which is What's the Buzz? We thought it would be good to start off by considering what's happening in the translation industry right now. What is the buzz? What's new? And what's on the horizon? To consider these questions, we've got three experts from different areas of the business to gaze into their crystal balls and tell us what they see. But first, I'd like to hear from you what you think the buzz is. And I'm now going to open a new poll by asking you, what is the buzz, according to you? So go to the polls tab on the right-hand side of your screen and type in your one, or if you can, maximum 2 words answers. And if you like someone else's answer, you can send that in too, so that we create another word cloud with the issues that you think are the buzz becoming bigger in the cloud. I'm going to leave the voting open for a little while so that as many of you as possible can participate. And while I do that, I'm going to introduce the speakers on this panel. Joining me for this informal chat, we have Alexandra Kraus, who is a translator for German, Italian and French, and teaches translation and interpreting at the Center for Translation Studies at the University of Vienna. She's also a board member of the European Masters in Translation, or EMT, and she's served as EMT Lind Ambassador since 2014. Please say hello, Alessandra.
Hello to everybody. Nice to be with you.
Thank you very much. Joining us from America, we have Al Lommel, Senior Analyst at the independent market research company Common Sense Advisory Research. He's a recognized expert in technology, quality processes, and interoperability standards. And he previously worked for the Localized Industry and Standards Association and the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, among other things. Say hello.
Greetings from the cold United States.
Okay, thank you. And our final speaker is Chris Durbin, who is a freelance translator and writer originally from the UK, now based in Paris. She specializes in publication level texts for demanding clients, primarily in business strategy and financial corporate communications. She's also the co-founder and co-organizer of SFT's Summer School for Financial Translators and is heavily involved in the Translate In series of seminars for translators who want to hone their writing skills. Hello.
Hi, it's great to be here. Fun to see so many freelance translators present.
That's good. Well, I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear your contribution to these discussions. So do keep sending in your word cloud answers. I'm just going to type in mine so I can also see your answers, because I can't see anything until I send mine in too. And I can see we've got answers coming in there. We've got 150 coming along. We've got machine translation is coming up quite a lot. And we've got stress and thrill. Those are interesting. We have rethinking workflows, the future, post-editing, of course, specialization. We have, oh, someone sent in a very interesting, I'm not quite sure, no, I think it's a B. Someone's sent us a B for what's the buzz. That's great. Thank you very much. So do keep on sending your answers in for a second. And during this session, we're going to be checking the pulse of the translation industry, exploring these latest developments, the perspectives for academia and for freelance translation, and seeing if and how the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated changes in the sector. So I think I'm now going to, we've got more than 2005 entries. I'm now going to lock that Slido poll, please, and let's see what it looks like, what the buzz is, and voting is now closed. Thank you. So AI and localization, remote work. Here's the cloud, so we can all see it nice and strong. We have well organized, no specialization, lifelong learning, competitiveness, quality measurement, newest worry. Oh, we have lots of newest worries to worry about. Terminology, that's a good one. Online, deep learning, I'm assuming that is. Rates, oh yes, I'm sure we'll be touching on that topic. the home office, the human factor, whisper, that's interesting. I think all may have something about that. Okay, well, I'm now going to say thank you, and we will now close the poll. Thank you. And you should be able to, on your screen, see the questions tab again. We're going to start off with a short introductory chat, and then we're going to come to your questions. There'll be plenty of time for them. So please do send them in using that questions tab, the same place you just answered for the poll. And you can vote on other people's questions as well. I'll try and go to the ones which have the most votes first. So I'd like to actually start by asking our panelists what they thought about your word cloud. Alexandra, from your perspective in academia, what trends did you pick up from that word cloud?
I would say neural translation and future-oriented things. We in academia, we are always thinking about technology. That is very important to us. And the human factor, what you said before, the combination between the two is very important to us, because academia always means that we have a sort of community life. And that's what we are still missing because of the pandemic. And now it became even much more important now to have this human factor combined with the technology. Before, technology was something we used, but being on the spot, you see. Now we use technology just to get in contact with each other, and we use it for the training purpose and the work purpose, which makes that technology became another connotation to us in academia and for students. And that's something we are partly working on and partly also worrying about, because it changed a lot our relationship, our human relationship between us, you see. And what
Absolutely. Carry on.
And what we were thinking of, although I got some words in this Slido, for example, the rates. I mean, obviously the rates are very interesting for professionals, but our future degree holders also have to live on translation in the broadest sense. And so to them, the rates are also a very important factor, even for the decision to picking up this study course. So if they realize, or if they think that the rates will decrease and that there will be much more stress, as we have also seen stress and worries in our future professional life, that means that less students are prepared to undertake this study course just because they see, let's say, fewer perspectives, if we may say so. And that's what we really have to explain our students, and that's what I hope will be also part of the results of TEF and what we are discussing, just to see how broad our discipline is, or how many possibilities we have really, and that we don't have to stick to the, let's say, old-fashioned and very narrow idea of translation, but that we have to open all this perspective in training and in the job situation, because both are closely linked to each other. And that's again something we are always dealing with in academia, is just to create this linkage between the academic world and the professional world, because sometimes you get the feeling that the academic world is living for itself and the professional world is always looking a bit with a suspicious eye on the academic world, if I may say so. And I would say my work the last 10 years was really dedicated to fill this gap and to overcome prejudices and even strange or false ideas about that, you see.
Okay, all right. Well, I think we'll certainly be touching on some more of those themes in a bit more detail in a moment. Thank you for that introduction. Al, I'd like to come to you. What struck you from that word cloud? What jumped out?
Well, a lot of the same things Alexandra has already said stood out. And I reiterate one of her points that I saw very clearly in the word cloud, is there's an interest in not only the technology, but in its interaction with the human aspects and what this means for the future. I suspect if we'd done this 5-6 years ago, there would have been a lot more angst evident in the word cloud, but now it seems to be more optimistic. But I would say that it's critical for developers to be looking at these human aspects, because it's often there's a tendency for technologists to want to emphasize technology in its own right, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but then forget about the impact on the human. And when I look at the word cloud, what I'm seeing is people trying to grapple with how do we reconcile these grandiose claims of technology that's going to solve everything, it's going to butter your bread, it'll tuck your children in at night, and by the way, it'll give you perfect translation while it's at it, which by the way is nonsense. But nonetheless, there's this faith in technology out there. But I look at the word cloud and I see people who have a more tempered and moderate view, I think because they're on the front lines in interacting with this technology. And I think they have perhaps a more realistic assessment. And that's what I saw manifest in the word cloud.
Okay, thank you. Chris, what about you? What jumped out at you?
Well, I agree with what has been said so far, but I was surprised that there was not more evidence. There was not more evidence of the human factor involved. And I think it might have to do with the filters that are in place when it's an event that is built around automation. Perhaps you filtered out the people who are dedicated to the human part, possibly. In the field I work in, and I know we're going to be talking about segmentation of markets, translation skills are really important. Technology is exciting. There's all sorts of doors that opens, but technology, excuse me, is the easy part. The hard part is actually carrying messages from one language to the other, and that is very definitely part of the human factor, the human skills that you bring to the task. One thing a message I hope to get out is that the future is very bright for translators who have the skills, and for teachers who are informing their students about the very attractive and interesting market segments there are out there. It involves specialization. It involves writing really well, and it involves very often working with others.
Okay, thank you. I think that we're going to obviously talk in more detail about all these topics, if not in this session, also in others. I know that there are going to be some very interesting things talking about future jobs in the translation industry. And I think there are some very surprising ones out there for you to be tuning in and listening to later on during TEF. Just getting all three of us, all of us back on the screen together. Alexandra mentioned something about the pandemic and how that has changed and how the human factor has become kind of more important. But I would like to ask all of you to talk about how you think the pandemic has affected the translation industry, and will those effects continue? Will we be seeing that, and what do we need to be doing accordingly? I don't know who would like to jump in first.
Well,
go on.
Okay, well, I mean, the good news is that many translators, freelance translators in particular, work from home or from at a distance in any case. So we had a lot of the skills that were needed to interact with our clients already. Many professions did not have that. Number two, we have in Europe anyway, very active professional associations who have negotiated with the government different governments, assistance as needed. My impression is that there has been a lot of pain, nonetheless, quite simply because markets were unsettled and budgets were postponed because nobody knew what was going on. There was a lot more to translate about COVID, of course, but still things were quite unsettled for a while. Now, my jumping back into the benefits, I think that's your question. I mean, the benefits or positive things that have come out of COVID. I am very much in favor of deep specialization, and it's been absolutely amazing the number of training and professional events in my sector, in my industry, my clients, that have enabled me to get in touch with high-level people in exactly the fields I work in, connect them into my network or become part of theirs, and bring them into the translation process. A lot more people were online and eager to connect than before. And this means getting out of the translation world into client world. And it became much, much easier during COVID.
Very interesting. That's always something that, certainly freelance translators have problems getting in contact with the clients, but also people who work in companies as well are sometimes quite far away from the people making the decisions about the translation. Al, what about you? How have you seen COVID affecting the industry?
Well, some of our examination where I work has looked at how individual vertical industries have been affected. And here's maybe the flip side to specialization is some specialties were absolutely cratered, as we like to say, during the pandemic. If you happen to specialize in the travel industry, that went down and has continued to sink. Now, others have done more interesting things. For instance, government initially peaked, dropped, and now is way up. Broadcast fell and has come up. So there's, each individual industry has had its own trajectory as far as translation is going. But we have also seen some bright spots for the language industry. So with COVID, it's really accelerated the move to spoken language services. These have become much more important. They were already growing, but COVID has accelerated that.
What do you mean by that?
So the initial reaction when COVID hit was a lot of the in-person interpreting assignments just simply vanished. But the technology was waiting there. And we found organization after organization that suddenly realized that in the absence of face-to-face opportunities, language gave them a way to engage audiences that they hadn't even realized they'd been missing. So you'd see large enterprises that would previously go to Las Vegas or Tokyo and do a road show, and they do it all in English or all in Japanese, suddenly hosting these things online, realizing they could get 10 times the audience, but that they needed to provide language for it. And so now there's this awareness in the corporate space that language, particularly spoken language, is really important. And so we've seen interpreting markets go down and then really bounce up, but in almost a completely new business configuration.
Okay, interesting. And Alexandra, you talked initially about COVID and how that makes the human factor even more important in academia. Would you like to expand on that a little bit? And then I'm going to go to some audience questions. We've got quite a few in already.
Okay, coming back a bit to what Chris and Ale said, is to us similar effects were true because we had the feeling that, for example, we could organize much more workshops or meetings with really outstanding experts, which we couldn't reach otherwise because we couldn't afford to invite them on the spot. This is impossible financially for universities. And we also felt that people were much more participating in those events. I mean, our students, even if it was supplementary events, not only the normal teaching, because they stood at home and had the chance to find a Zoom link, and that to them it was no effort or no special effort, and they were linked to the outer world in a much better way, and they got much more input by experts than they could have before. And that's something we hope we will keep for future times. And the same is true for distance teaching. We have to find a blended way, let's say, just to have distance teaching and teaching in the lecture halls just for the human contact, as we said before, because we realized that many students, for example, working students or students having a family, because you can't expect students always to be 18-year-old young people who have only their study courses as their duty. And that means that automatically we reach much more people and we get much more input from, for example, more mature people who have just a working experience, which is important again for the human factor and for group dynamics, which in academia is one of the most important factors for obtaining a good result, not only for the discipline itself, but again for other soft skills, so may we call them soft skills. And what I fully agree with Chris is that when we are talking about technology, we really need to say that only really good translators, I mean language experts, may use technology in a proper way. Otherwise, technology is misleading and is completely useless. So what we have to train people for, and that's what we are realizing now in the pandemic even more, because we have much more written results, or we are talking in a different way to our students, and we get in a different contact, which is more individual, where we can really assess their individual tasks. We realize that we really have to train them even much more on language competences and culture competences in order to have a good base for all the technology. We train them, we consider them very important, but this is only a secondary asset, if you want to say so, for a translator. And that's how the pandemic, the effects of pandemic to me or to universities. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Well, in fact, that kind of leads us nicely onto the top voted question that we have at the moment, which has got 51 votes. And this is, well, it's a general question to all of you. And it's, which will be the role of human translators in an increasingly machine-driven translation sector? And this kind of gets to the heart of the whole discussion that we're starting in these 3 days. I don't know who would like to jump in first on this one. Al, would you like to kick us off? The role of human translators?
I'd start out by saying this is, of course, something I think every industry is facing in some fashion now, and some already face. So the analogy I like to use is, if you look at the accounting industry in 1985, it was largely manual bookkeeping. You saw the introduction of Excel and these sorts of things, and suddenly what accountants used to do went away, but that doesn't mean accountants went away. In fact, using these tools, they become more valuable because they're able to do more things. They're able to do predictive analytics. They've gone from saying this is where you were 3 weeks ago to this is where you'll be in 6 months. And the opportunity for language services is that if translation and interpreting providers are able to use these tools and find ways to integrate them, that they may be able to replicate these successes by being able to do more and offload the things that don't need a human touch to the machines. I mean, really, we don't need translators to translate 87 variants of click next to continue. The machines can and should do this. But then you get the kinds of stuff Chris talks about that's interesting. That's why people got into this job in the first place. And that the machines aren't going to replace people in any time soon, if ever. And I'm positive on technology, but skeptical that it will ever replace humans. And if that's the case, then we're going to end up with translators looking forward to, I think, much more interesting and rewarding jobs, and potentially much better paying ones through this.
Oh gosh, well, the fees issue we'll get onto in a moment, or maybe Chris will want to talk about that. What do you think, Chris, in the human factor?
Well, no, I agree with what Arne has said, and we get there immediately into the whole market segmentation business. From my point of view, the bulk end, the low end of the market, which was basically word replacement, has been taken over by automated solutions in any case. And the high end of the market, where you actually have to think about what you're doing, there's high risk involved often. Clients are very definitely involved with the production of texts that mean exactly what their communicative message is, not just what the words on the page say. Well, that's a sort of scenario that I see every day in the type of work I do. Who is suffering right now, I think, are the people in the middle, translators in the middle, who were, business was taking over. They were producing work that was pretty much okay, but they didn't go in depth into the fields they were working in, so they didn't necessarily understand the underlying issues. And the type of work that many of them are doing can be done to some degree by automated solutions right now. And so, you know, since my heart is the heart of a freelance translator, and I would really like everyone to come out of this in a good state of mind and a good state of income, my solution is for people to look very carefully at upgrading their skills and moving up into those segments of the market where if you get it wrong, people can die, bad things can happen, companies can lose face, they can lose and come under huge liability issues. Those types of texts will always need humans. And the very notion that translators will be replaced by machines, it's a straw man question, it's a silly question. That for a certain part of the market, of course that applies. But if you are a translator who loves the work and enjoys wordplay, well, you should be moving away from that anyway, shouldn't you?
Good question. Yes, indeed. Certainly, it's the more interesting the work, the more pleasurable it is. But of course, you want to be paid for that work too. We touched on fees. Do you want to sort of go into a little bit more about fees, and then I'm going to come to Alexandra?
I'm happy to talk about fees. The issue being in the training work I do through SFT and in collaboration with French universities, we very frequently see that young translators, student translators, and some existing older translators have no idea about potential fee structures. There's this idea that the going rate is this or the going rate is that, and the word gets passed around, and sometimes there are surveys, but they do not capture the parts of the market that are the most interesting. And so one of the most useful things that associations can do is bring together statistics to show where markets are. And I think translators need to move from just announcing their price, whether it's per word or per hour or per day. They need to move into value pricing, where they are very aware of what their value is to clients, and not just say it to their translator friends, but actually develop a convincing argument for clients.
Now, it's not necessarily easy. Alexandra, is that something that you talk about in when you're talking to your students?
For sure. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, we are training them on that. We are in close connection with the associations, and we always tend really to update all those things. What we are also saying our students, and that's exactly what Chris and Ale said, is that the market becomes more and more demanding and specialized, and this middle group, or even middle generation, you may say, because I think it's also a bit a generational problem, because we see that elder translators tend really to adapt much more to the development, and the fresh degree holders too. And there's an in-between generation that is a bit lost because they weren't really used to technology and to all the changes, and they still may believe that they are well trained and there's no need to language or to lifelong learning processes until a certain point. And that's why this middle generation, and although what specialization is concerned, this middle layer, let's say, of translators sometimes fail. That's true. What we are also thinking is that we need to train our students to become a bit the assessors and the input giver for all this development. Let's say they have to learn to be so good as translators to know, to assess the tools, partly to judge if it's invaluable input, if they can use the tools or not, if it makes sense in this specific situation or not, and to also give input like, let's say, usability trainings or things like that, which could be really important even for the industry to know, because you suppose that the fresh degree holders are the future user of all those tools, or the main users of all those tools. So the training becomes much more demanding for us too, because we have really to observe the developments and to adapt them very quickly, which is not easy if you know how long it takes to have a valuable and accepted training program. And that's one of the issues we have to deal with, that we are always a bit behind the development, because the training programs need a certain time to be accepted and implemented and whatever, and also financed, which is also a big aspect for us in academia. And what we didn't talk until now is that we in academia are thinking that it could be also worth training people in niche languages, because for niche languages, technology partly is not as well developed as, for example, for English, French, or whatever. So we really tend to consider niche or languages of lesser diffusion, or however you may define them. We always consider them a bit a luxury discipline or something like that, which is not true for the market, because the markets need those languages, starting from African dialects, coming to whatever. So, and there is a big demand, and academia should adapt to this demand too, by training people also for those languages.
Interesting. Al, have you picked up on that kind of niche languages and the need for that?
Absolutely. I'll mention two things here. One supports what Alexandra said. Is when I worked at the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, we did an examination of resources available for various language pairs and created a heat map. And what we saw was a cluster. It was run from red where there was a lot to blue where there was nothing. A cluster with English, French, German, Spanish, Japanese, and Chinese, where there were a lot of resources, and then everything else was blue. And I actually had to tweak the color scale so it didn't look quite as bleak as it really was. So if you're relying on technology to save the day for a language like Swahili or Frisian within Europe, it's simply not going to happen. And so, yeah, there is an increasing demand for these languages. Businesses are realizing that if they want to reach the next billion customers, that involves probably looking at something like 150 economically significant languages. And we're also seeing an increased interest from businesses in trying to find experts in countries who speak these languages and have valuable knowledge, that maybe they aren't professional translators, but they're paraprofessionals with deep subject matter expertise who can be trained to provide translation. But finding something like a nuclear physicist in Kenya who could convey something that's vital about nuclear policy into Swahili, and maybe work with a professional translator for smoothing. But there is a very strong interest now in these languages that were previously ignored.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to move on to, we've got lots more questions coming in, so let's try and move on with them. We've obviously got quite a few students and people who are newly graduated who are looking at their careers and trying to get some advice, which is one of the things that in the past TEF, the feedback, as people have said, is one of the most useful things in TEF. So I'm going to ask the next question, which has got 64 votes. And it is, how can newly graduated students be competitive compared with experienced translators? What strategies do you recommend? Now, in a way, Alexandra, that's for you, but Chris, I'd like to ask you that.
I think that's a terrific question. And I feel able to respond partly because this year, for the first time in many years, my translation partner and I had an intern. And we took on this intern, I'd given a course for the SFT at a university, and students contacted me to know if they could be interns. Internships are great, and you start there. You should have a plan in mind as of your second year or whenever, so that you are aiming for internships that will get you somewhere. That will, if at the very worst, teach you what you don't want to do. But I think having a plan for your internship is important. I also think it's really important that you gain the confidence needed to show your work around, because that is what's going to convince, through mentor arrangements or other things, established translators to take a closer look at you. And if I look at what our intern has brought us, it's a certain granularity, great research skills, care to detail. All of those things were just extremely useful to my translation partner and myself. So those are things you can bring to the table, right? I know after I'd given that particular class, I was contacted by these students who wanted internships, okay? I asked them if they could send me some work, because that will give me an idea of what you're capable of doing. Only one student managed to send me some examples. Everyone else sort of, well, yeah, maybe, but they hadn't realized that, what you do in your classes, what you do as extracurricular work when you're studying, that's raw material that where you can shine. You could potentially shine.
Interesting. Alexandra, do you encourage your students to create a portfolio that they can then show to clients?
Yes, what I tell my students is that they have to plan their career from the very first day of the study course, which means even when they register for the study course, their career starts there at that point. And what I tell them is, for example, to realize which competencies they still have. Sometimes students are not very self-confident. They normally, my students are master students, so normally they have a bachelor degree and they have many competencies, and they don't realize how it's worth really to show them. For example, creating a homepage, even if you're still a master student, is just a good strategy, because you realize what you're capable of, and you show, as Durban said, the world, the outer world, what you're capable of. And the portfolio automatically becomes a sort of reference portfolio for those homepages. So less, and I also try hard, if I realize that students are interested in just aiming at a career and they're really just looking for, let's say, the next step towards the professional world, I really encouraging them to do some little tasks. Internship is, I'm responsible for internships at our faculty, and that's really the missing step. Sometimes they don't dare, or they say, I'm not prepared to, I'm not at level, and I push them partly to internships. That's one thing I always do, and the earlier the better, because they realize what they are still missing, they realize what they're interested in, where their skills are. So one of the big mistakes for students is to say, okay, first the degree and then all job talks and job thinking. That's the really most horrible error they could incur to. It's just the need to realize that if you are dedicating your study life to translation, you have to live with translation from the very first beginning, and translation means that's a profession, and that's it, you see. I admit that you need some, let's say, scientific basis, that all that is very, very important, and without all other things won't be useless. But you really have to plan it from the very first day. And that's why how I hopefully encourage my students. And yeah, you never know, because it depends very much on the character. There are shy characters, there are people who are not self-confident, there are people who have, although let's say, bad experiences with within their BA studies, or yeah, haven't been accepted, for example, for certain internships and things like that. And so you need really to build up a sort of self-confidence. But I think this is true for any study course, so it doesn't make any difference. And what we encourage them very, very much is also to do the Erasmus or any sort of foreign, let's say, experience in a different country, because every university, every setting is different, and you may take the advantages from this setting. We also encourage them to do the internships abroad, because an internship abroad makes a big difference to what they have heard, learned, and seen at home. And so that makes really a sort of asset and added value, which is very important. I mean, we are talking about intercultural lives in translation, or intercultural is one of the big issues we are dealing with in translation. So why shouldn't we send them abroad? And this is sometimes they even like it so much that they spend 1 year abroad or even more, and they continue even the studies abroad, which is, I mean, a pity for us, because it's really very good students we are losing on one hand side, but on the other hand side, it's a success story to us that those students are prepared to change their complete life and to go abroad and to gain much more experience and to live a different way of professional life.
Exactly. And in fact, you know, we all talk about, when we talk about localization, it's all about understanding the culture, and what better way to understand the culture than to be in the country. And in fact, Chris, I know you also mentioned that travel is important.
It's so much easier when you are just, I mean, the people who ask this question are young graduates. And so if we're telling them they should have had a better internship, that's a little late in the day. Sorry about that, people. But you can actually, now that travel is becoming a possibility, you should do that. The travel you can do now before you have a family, usually, often, will serve you 100 times over. You can also make a point of going to translator events, Translator Association events. I know even if you're shy, force yourself to shake 5 hands at each meeting or bump 5 elbows. When I go to client industry events, I force myself to shake hands or to meet 5 new people each time. It's a discipline you make, and it's become so much easier the more you do it.
And in fact, TEF this year has plenty of opportunities for you everyone to network with the one-to-one meetings. Please do make the opportunity of that. Really, it's a fantastic way of meeting new people, both in the virtual network sessions and in the one-to-one meetings. Now, I want to go back to, it's not got one of the highest votes, but it has got 28 votes. And I wanted to ask Al about this. We've got a question that says, how can we as an industry advise or regulate the use of MT, which seems to become standard regardless of text typology, translation purpose, complexity?
Why don't you give me a hard question there? This issue of regulation is a very timely one and a tough one, because of course certainly in a lot of jurisdictions, there's really no way to regulate it. And so this has led to some appalling uses of MT. ProPublica in the US reported about US border forces along Mexico using it to vet asylum seekers' social media histories and making legal decisions based on very bad MT looking at people's Facebook posts. And this is the kind of thing that shouldn't be. One of the things that may help here isn't so much from the regulatory standpoint, but there's an increasing interest in what's called ethical AI. So trying to put some ethical guardrails on the use of artificial intelligence. And we predict at CSA Research that we're going to see the emergence of what we call responsible MT, which includes some of these things where MT will be able to say, hey, this I'm not qualified to translate, or that could ask for clarification or do some of these things. But this is still at least a few years off. And
gosh, that's going to be difficult. I mean, it's hard enough to get translators to, let's say, admit when they can't do something. And it's going to be hard to put that into the machines.
Well, machines don't have ego involved, so there's at least that going for it.
Okay.
But in the meantime, one of the challenges has been, frankly, irresponsible PR announcements from some tech firms that say, hey, MT has reached human parity. And if you go and you look at the actual research, the researchers are often a lot more circumspect. They say, in this very narrow test case and this very narrow set of parameters, yes, the machine has performed better than humans. But that's not a generalizable statement. And so we need people who are better educated about the technology, who can push back when an executive, for instance, says, oh, let's just replace all the translators with humans, who can say no, and here's why this is going to fail. So there's an education aspect. I'm not optimistic that regulation will solve this, unfortunately, because the economic incentives are too great. But to the extent that people can push back and identify the risk areas that Chris earlier articulated very well, and get people at least thinking about what happens if MT is wrong and somebody dies as a result of it, who then is responsible? Which in most cases would be the company that irresponsibly used it. So I think these sorts of things are working themselves out, but need a lot more attention.
Interesting. Chris, I know that you have quite a lot of thoughts on this, and I saw, Alexandra, you were nodding like mad as well when we were saying that, you know, the machines are not going to take over completely. But Chris, your reaction?
Yeah, no, I'm totally at one with Arla. I know that in this market segments that interest me, which is private sector, and I'm feeling very COP26 here, because yesterday or this morning they were talking about bringing the private sector in, $125 trillion or euros in assets in the private sector that will make our planet greener, etc. I don't work for government, not a matter of principle, but just they don't have the budgets that I want. And I rarely work for public entities, sometimes a little bit, but not so much. I work very definitely in the private sector, the business sector. And my impression is often that discussions of pricing by university people, or in the localization world, for example, which is largely bulk prices for me, so it doesn't interest me, they ignore the existence of clients who are crying out for better quality work in the private sector. And that means, of course, a certain investment in raising your skills and being able to speak to these people, and specializing in the areas they're in, and understanding their unspoken desire. But that is, I think, extremely important. And risk, emphasizing the risk that exists with MT, is one of the best sales arguments I have.
Okay, Alexandra?
I would say I train my people by showing them so-called critical incidents with MT. So sometimes they laugh at this, sometimes they realize the risk, as Ale and Chris said. So critical incidents are really a good way to show them where the limits of MT are. And I think they could also be a good way to show the public or the clients or whoever that there are some risks with the MT, linked to MT, if the human factor is missing. And what Chris said, I mean, you have to take into account that, for example, a master program normally is a 2 years program. So we have a short time to train them on very, very different skills, because, for example, the ethic aspect is also an aspect we are dealing with. We need to. Then we have sometimes mixed programs, which means translation and interpreting. So we dedicate a certain time of those 2 years to interpretation, which makes, again, shortening the time for translation issues or for specialization. We're trying hard to promote a certain entry level for master courses in order to really have the time to specialize people or to make them become specialists. But the reality is so different in all over Europe. I can only talk for Europe, so I don't know exactly how it could be maybe in the United States or anywhere else. But for Europe, we realized that even within Europe, we have so different program structures, we have so different paying, so different bureaucratic constraints. And so we have really to deal with this reality, which makes that partly our students, and that's, I admit it frankly, are not prepared to deal with really demanding tasks or specialized and better paid tasks. What we can do is just to tell them that those tasks exist, to promote specialization, to tell them that it's worth specializing, it's worth investing even after the degree some time to specialization or to go more in depth with certain issues. And we can only give them some hints, and we get the feeling sometimes I would like to teach them for 4 years for a master, you say, just to have the feeling I prepared them to the real life. That's impossible. That's the normal constraints any study course has, and you can't avoid that. We have to raise sensitivity to that. We have to tell them what exists, what is happening in the outer world, and then we have partly to leave it to initiative, talent, or time dedication they are prepared to invest in this, you see.
Okay, and while I've got you there, there's a question I would like to ask you first, which is from Alexandra. It has 57 votes, and it says, what do you think is the most actual technology which is not still being taught at universities yet? You may not be able to talk about your university. I don't know.
That's a bit of a problem, because it may be very different, because there are some study courses that really concentrate on technology, and there are some others that don't concentrate on that and are not focused on that. So the technology which is less taught,
I don't know, maybe Chris or Al might want to
Yeah.
jump in and say, you know, things
I
that people
can't.
should be trained in.
I don't know about should be. I'll just jump in. I don't know about should be, but I have seen extremely interesting work done by human translators who use technology and so on, but who dictate their work. Who use voice recognition technologies, which are that's not really cutting edge new, but I've seen like remarkable results. And I am not trained in that, and I keep thinking I probably should. It would be useful or interesting to try. Arlie, you have some good ideas, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's an inherent sort of conservatism in educational institutions just because of bureaucratic constraints. And so often it takes a little while for technologies to filter into use in the educational environment. So there is still, I can only speak for the US, but I imagine this is true in Europe as well. There's still a focus on sort of the traditional CAT environment, but we're starting to see the transformation of this in the direction of augmented translation. And I think there's a little bit of a lag for people using things like adaptive MT, think of Lilt, for those who know that. There's definitely a lag for some of the content enrichment tools that have been developed out of European projects that offer tremendous potential for simplifying research for translators. So there's these things that are at least available in the lab that working translators aren't using yet, and I don't yet see in the educational environment. I think that will rectify, but there's often this lag.
May I jump in as representative of the educational world? Let's say this way around. We try to train them on that. And for example, within the EMT universities, we have a working group dedicated to technology, and we try really to be to work with all the most advanced technologies. For example, the audiovisual sector, which is one of the strengths we are dealing with within translation programs, is very much interested in voice to text, text to voice, re-speaking, any sort of dictation system. Dragon is just, let's say, very much popular in universities. So we deal with this. Obviously, we can't afford to have licenses for all students and things like that, but we incorporate with the industry for getting such licenses for free, for example, for 1 year, in order to train the future users on those technology tools. So as far as EMT universities are concerned, and I really think that many other universities which are not part of the EMT are dealing with those issues too. We are working with technology and we are implementing technology, obviously step by step, and as far as our financial potential gives us the possibility to do so. Yeah.
But interesting point, that financial thing, because of course, as you say, these licenses they don't come for free, and so yes, that's an issue too. Chris, you wanted to jump in?
No, I was just thinking as we talk about all these various options, I will circle back around to the importance of actually being able to translate regardless of the technology. I wonder sometimes when I talk to some students what they would do, and this is not your university, Alexandra, but what would they do if they did not have their tools? And there's a part of me, the old-fashioned part of me, that says they should be able to translate anyway. Like they should be able to give it a pretty good shot, even though we all use the internet. And it's okay, fine. What can you translate, students out there? Can you translate without tools? How do you do without tools?
Okay, well, I don't know if anyone's going. Maybe in the session chat that we can't see, they'll be answering that. It'll be interesting to hear about those discussions. Maybe they'll come up in the networking. We have quite a few more questions. Some of them are quite specific. So, for example, we have this one that has 46 votes, and it says, "Can you recommend online training in post-editing for freelancers?" I don't know whether that's someone asking for a specific course, which of course that is not, let's say, our role here to talk about specific courses and plug particular things, but online training, is there any around there?
My reaction would be to check out your National Translators Association first. because they will very often, I think, have a better grasp of the sounder things. I'm a bit skeptical about, and we get back to diversification, the number of sort of translators who have sort of gone into kind of teaching and giving courses and stuff like that. And I'm not sure whether that is a sign of financial desperation or wanting to share, which is possible, but I think the market is right now pretty swamped with courses offered by private individuals. And some are good, some are bad. Get out there and read the reviews. But my first port of call would be my National Translators Association.
Okay, thank you. Now we've got a number of questions about specialization, a topic that we have already talked a little bit about. But just Ralph says, being a language expert isn't enough. You need specialist sector knowledge as well. Specialization is key in dealing with MT and automation. Would you agree? And I think I could probably also answer for all of you to say yes. But anything you want to add on that? Maybe Ald, would you like to come in on that for a moment?
Sure. I'd say if you're selecting a specialty, look for something that you care about, that you're going to be interested in. I've seen some people pick specialties they don't like, which always puzzles me. So look for something that you care about and define it broadly enough. So I'm not a professional translator. I've done some professional translation work, but my specialty was far too narrow. I did Hungarian to English ethnomusicology, which meant I get about one project every 3 years. There's just not demand because I'm far too narrow. But you know, if I were trying to make my living as a translator, I would say, okay, I have this interest. What can I back this out into something broader where I do have expertise that I could make a living at? Say that's one thing. And then if you like working with technology, then look for areas where there is going to be a lot of technology applied. If you don't, there are plenty of areas where I don't see MT making significant inroads. And so you can sort of select your specialty around your comfort level with technology, what you'd like to do, and your expertise to find a niche that works for you.
That's interesting what you say about the, you know, choosing, if you don't like the technology, to choose a field where it's less useful. For example, you were talking earlier, I imagine we're talking about, you know, those moments where the translation could cost lives, that kind of area we're talking about. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You know, I would add in, especially, this is a question we often get in SAT from young graduates and so on. Where do I specialize? How do I specialize? Read what the private sector reads. Read what business people read. Read the Financial Times. Read the Wall Street Journal. Even if you don't want to work in business per se, but read quality publications to learn what is being talked about. What are the hot topics? What are the companies that are doing things in your language combination? Do they have a factory in your country, in your city, in your so on? You begin to develop feel for potential areas of specialization like that. 2 years ago at TEF, or the last TEF that was in person, during one of the coffee breaks, I always make a point of shaking hands and so on. And there was a young woman, Russian woman who was living in Antwerp, I think, and I asked her, so what do you translate? And she looked at her shoes the way translators do and said, technical texts. And I pushed her on it, and she seemed quite embarrassed to be saying that it was technical. Turned out that she was a specialist in air conditioning systems. That is a very, excuse me, cool specialty. That is the type, seriously, I'm sorry, but that is you should not be hiding that beneath technical. That is a true and genuine specialty. And you should, if you can become the Russian to French or Dutch, or sorry, Dutch or French into Russian specialist in air conditioning technology and heating systems, whoa, you've got a market, right? But translators don't think like that.
Alexandra?
There's one aspect you have to take into account. I tell them sometimes that if you become a specialist, you may deal with this specialty for 20 years, let's say. And sometimes it's even worth thinking of having 2 specializations or 2 core issues in order to have a sort of psychological balance, because you end up dealing the whole time only with heating systems. You are really a specialist. You go in depth, you have a fantastic market, but one of those days you will be bored of that, sincerely speaking, you see. But sometimes, yeah, I realize I had the experience. I had some people working, for example, for a car firm, being terminologist for that. And after 3, 4, or 5 years, they gave up and they changed completely specialty. They ended up becoming musicologists, really, because it was such a counterbalance to what they did before. And if you take this into account from the very first beginning, you have got the chance to have a sort of psychological balance, which doesn't mean that you aren't a specialist for the 2 specialties. No, you have to go in depth, you have to train on that, you have to get informed, and you have to choose 2 specialties which make sense from the market and which make sense from your personal point of view, from your talents or your interests. That's for sure. And that's exactly what I really tell them. Don't take a specialty only because of the money, because if you don't like it, you won't really become happy with that. But sometimes it may be useful to have, let's say, 2 different strands where you can specialize for psychological reasons.
Okay, but also be sure. Sorry, I say also be sure that there is a market for what you do. I've used the example before, but a good friend of mine adored, a British guy, a translator, adored cricket. Right? He knew everything about cricket. It was an ideal field to specialize in. Sadly, he translated from Spanish into English. Like, there was never going to be a market there. There just wasn't. So he did not, quite wisely, chose not to specialize in cricket translations.
And just to pick up on Alexandra's point, just from my personal point of view, I mentioned I have kind of 2 specialisms. I've got the film industry, film and audiovisual industry, and I've got the Holocaust. Now, you can imagine it's good for me to sometimes have a break from Holocaust translation, which is not exactly the lightest material in the world. So again, that's another reason why you might want to have more than one specialization. Now, we're almost coming to the end of our discussion, but there was one question that I really wanted to ask you all, which was from Carlos D. And it says, there seems to be less focus on training translators as entrepreneurs, although entrepreneurship education is crucial to survive in today's world. So final thoughts on that subject? I'm not quite sure who wants to jump in first.
I think, again, professional associations are offering training. I totally get the idea that in universities, you do not necessarily have the time to tackle that. You have a lot to cover in a very short period of time. And I also think sometimes that the university staff are not necessarily aware enough of the inner dealings of the market to teach it. But I totally agree that translators need a more business-like outlook. And again, those are things that you have to learn. You have to learn.
I'd absolutely agree with that. And for entrepreneurship, it fits in very nicely with the specialization discussion, of course, because if you're an entrepreneur, you need to produce something of value and articulate that value. And you can only do that if you can differentiate yourself against other people out there and articulate what you bring to the table. So this goes hand in hand. And I think learning basic techniques of sales and marketing goes a long way. I've met far too many translators who think their job's done by sending in their resumes to some LSPs, portals, and then hoping they get work. And then when it doesn't rain work on them, they want to shake their fists at the sky and ask why since nobody recognized their genius, but they haven't put themselves out in a way that anybody would.
Yeah, so it's not just being a skilled translator, it's also selling your skills as well. Alessandra?
Yeah, that's what we tell them too. And we try to create a linkage by inviting professionals or having workshops about those issues. And we try to really, again, create a certain sensitivity towards entrepreneurship. We don't have specialized courses on that, or rarely universities can afford, as we said before, to have courses on that. but by inviting people and by having workshops on that, and although we are also collaborating with the association, in our case with the Austrian Association, but this, I mean, as soon as they provide a workshop on that, we immediately inform all students just to give them the chance to take part in that and to be informed and to be at level for that. Obviously, partly it's training by the job, or it's the real life that makes you become an entrepreneur, and you can't teach it like another theory or another thing, obviously.
Well, I think we can certainly, I think the networking sessions over TEF will be an opportunity to actually make sure that people can pass on some of those tips, and also ask maybe some of the questions that we've not been able to answer. For example, what's the best place to find updated translation interpretation fees, which we're not going to go in now. And, you know, the main reason for the anxiety with respect to technology that translators feel, but I don't think we're going to go into those now, because we're coming to the end of this session. But before we do, I'd like to actually open a final poll. So if we could open the poll, and that should replace the question tab on your right-hand side of the screen, and you should see the poll. And in the light of the discussions that we've just had just now, I'd like to find out what you think the buzz is now. Has it changed? Are you putting new things in there? We're going to create a word cloud again. Please send in your 1 or 2 word answers. And again, if you like the answer someone else has put in, if you type in the same answer and send it again, the word will get bigger. I'm just going to put in a word so that I can start seeing your answers. And hopefully they will all start coming up now. I can see 10 people have answered. That's good. Please send those in. I'm going to leave the poll open for a minute or so, and we will see the results in a minute. A reminder also to share your TEF insights with the wider world outside on social media using the hashtag 2021TEF. Coming up in a moment, after a short 5-minute technical break, we're going to be hearing from Rytis Martikonis from our TEF organisers and hosts, the European Commission's Directorate General for Translation. And we'll also be hearing more about the first edition of the EMT Challenge. But before that, we've got 133 people who've been sending in their results so far. Keep sending them in. I'm going to we can see it on the screen. Oh, it's all moving in front of our eyes. Specialization, either with a Z if you're American, or with an S if you're British English. They're obviously the key ones that are coming out there, and that is something that obviously we touched a lot on in this session. Human factor, the ethical use of MT. I think we'll also be hearing a little bit more about ethics later on in the conference as well. Adaptation, still specialize. We have suggested tool upskilling, that's interesting. AI, machine translation, they're getting bigger, the human factor. Okay, well, I think at this point we've got, I'll wait till we get to 175 people. So, oh no, we've already jumped to 182. So I'm now going to say that we should lock this poll from voting. And let's just see the final. Okay, the voting is now closed. And yes, specialization has come up as the biggest topic. Of course, it's the thing we touched on the most. Thank you very much indeed for voting on those polls and for sending in so many interesting questions. The only thing for me left to do in this session is to thank our 3 speakers. If we could see them all on screen, that would be great, so we can say our bye-byes. Thank you. The technology behind the scenes is getting them onto the screen. Thank you very much indeed. So thank you to Alessandra, to Al, and to Chris for your interesting, well, actually fascinating contributions and good tips there. And obviously some of the messages that you've been putting across really came across in that word cloud. So people were obviously listening and following very closely. So thank you very much indeed for your contributions this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so the next session is going to start at in 5 minutes' time at 5:25. And with that, I'm going to officially end this session.